Dream of the beauty within your soul.
George Floyd!
When you dream, dream slow. Take the time to let dreams grow. Just dream, just dream, just dream.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Brick House. My name is Kai Youngblood. I'm the general manager of BRIC TV, and we're so glad to see you here this evening. Before I kind of go into my opening remarks, I want to start with an important acknowledgement of the land which we are currently standing on. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the territory of the Canarsie and the Munsee Lenape people, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. So a little bit about BRIC. Raise your hand if you've ever been to Brick House. All right, to a class, to see BRIC Jazz Fest, to see the gallery. Awesome. Yes, I see someone here who's raised their hand like 4 times. That's awesome. And raise your hand if you've ever been to BRIC Celebrate Brooklyn in Prospect Park. Yay! Awesome. We love to hear that. BRIC is many things. Oftentimes, we're trying to tell people we're all these things, so it's really good to see some repeat folks coming to our events, both at Brick House and in the park. And stay tuned, because we're going to be announcing the Celebrate Brooklyn season soon, in June. All right, so a little bit about BRIC. BRIC is a leading arts and media institution anchored in downtown Brooklyn, whose work spans contemporary visual and performing arts, media, and civic action for over 40 years. 40 years. Our institution has shaped Brooklyn's cultural and media landscape by presenting and incubating artists, creators, students, and media makers. As a creative catalyst for our community, we ignite learning in people of all ages and centralize diverse voices that take risks and drive culture forward. BRIC builds Brooklyn's creative future. All right, you can learn more by going to our website at bricartsmedia.org and following us at BRIC Brooklyn and at BRIC TV. So that's all of my remarks at this point. Basically, I'm just going to speak from the heart and say how very excited we are to be having this talk here at Brick House in collaboration with BAM, to be speaking about Lorraine Hansberry's work. This is a big deal for us indeed. And with that being said, I'm going to introduce Molly Silberberg, who's the Associate Director of Humanities at BRIC. Welcome, Molly. At BAM, sorry. Welcome, Molly.
Hello, everyone. And oh, how nice it would be to work here, too. It's a great institution. So thank you all so much for being here. As Kai said, my name is Molly Silberberg. I run BAM's Humanities Programming as part of our Creative Social Impact Division. And we're so thrilled to be partnering with BRIC today on this conversation, which, as I hope you all know, is presented in conjunction with the sign in Sidney Brustein's window, which is Lorraine Hansberry's incisive final work. The stunning production is running at the BAM Harvey Theater just around the corner through this Friday. And it's also presented alongside an incredible exhibit, Art is Energy, Lorraine Hansberry World Builder, which is on view in the Rudin Family Gallery just adjacent to the BAM Harvey Theater. So in thinking about what conversations we host as part of BAM Humanities, we look to the work on our stages and at the critical questions and ideas that we need to unpack in community with one another. And as we're inundated with the intersecting crises and turmoil of our moment, it felt valuable to turn to Lorraine Hansberry's ever-resonant words and to examine this question of what it means to be an American radical today, her call to white liberals to own up to their role in the work, and how we can explore Hansberry's vision for radicalism, both within the world of the sign in Sidney Brustein's window and beyond. So I have the honor of just very, very briefly introducing who is on stage here today, but please do go to the talk webpage to look at everybody's bios in full, since I'm just acknowledging who's here with us. So moderating and participating in today's conversation is Soyika Diggs-Colbert, who curated for BAM the exhibit Art is Energy, and is also the Idle Family Professor of African American Studies and Performing Arts at Georgetown University, and the Vice President of Interdisciplinary Initiatives there. And she'll be joined in conversation by several members of the creative team of the production of the sign in Sidney Brustein's window, including director Annie Kaufman, script supervisor and director and trustee of the Lorraine Hansberry Literary Trust, Joy Gresham, and the dramaturg on the show, Arminda Thomas. So I am so grateful to these brilliant and thoughtful creative voices for being here with us today. Now, before we go into their conversation, I want to welcome one other person to the stage, and that is New York-based poet, playwright, screenwriter, and performer Grace Tapia, who is an alum of BAM's Brooklyn Interns for Arts and Culture program, who will open today's program with a poem. So please join me in welcoming Grace to the stage.
I am tired of yelling, of screaming into a void, pouring my precious rage out, all to be told my pain is a sign of eloquence, a feat of education, but nothing more. Impressive to have been poured out a body such as mine, an accomplishment for those who have listened because they took up precious minutes of their precious lives or to give precious space for me and my plight. My pain and the tears I've shed are only holy if they manage to be a 3-minute video you can share on Instagram. The rage that I have built from loss can only serve as a white woman's I'm sorry. I am tired of yelling facts and statistics I haven't been given the luxury to really understand, all to fight for a scrap of humanity I won't be given. My siblings won't be given, they won't be given, still dying from a disease y'all claim is nameless. I know it as capitalism, as poverty, as racism, as bigger than racism. I know it as a cage put on people meant to exist as sunlight. I know it as children numb to death and grown people whose fear has consumed them inside out, who won't go outside and check the 3 locks they have on the door twice, 3 times over to get the sleep they haven't really felt in years. I yell for them, even in times I don't dare yell for myself, yet it has done nothing. It has been used as an excuse for people's nothings and promises to be better, as if guilt and shame can ever ease the pain of those who have lost everything and will somehow lose more. My rage has turned into the highest performance art to revere for praise and imitated for the intelligence I somehow can never really feel is mine. I am tired of yelling, but I never wish to know the hollow peace of complete silence. Thank you.
Thank you for that beautiful poem. And thank you all for joining us for what I know will be a rich conversation. My name is Soyika Colbert. I will be moderating this conversation with these brilliant women who I've had the luxury of having individual conversations with, but this is my first time having this group together, so we're all in for a treat. So let's begin by defining our terms. So at the end of Hansberry's unfortunately short life, she gave a speech where she called on her white liberal friends to stop being liberals and to become radicals. So both based on Sign in Sidney Brustein's window, the Sign in Sidney Brustein's window, which Hansberry was finishing at the time that she gave that speech, and her work more generally, how would you distinguish between those two terms, between being a liberal and being a radical? Go ahead, Arminda. It looks like you want to jump in.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that speech, that was Black Revolution and the White Black Backlash, right? Which I think is a kind of seminal moment in that time, because it's this time in the civil rights movement where things are kind of diverging, and you can feel that that the people who have been allies are a little tired of the struggle, and feeling like maybe, you know, that there should be a little more patience, and maybe there should be a little more complacency, and I think that I think for me the difference between liberalism and radicalism is that liberalism tends to think that if you just press the right buttons within the system, things will reset into a way that is at least a little more equitable, at least a little more fair, and then people can go about their business and live their lives, and things can be pretty happy with everything else pretty much in place. And radicalism suspects that it takes more than that, that the things that are broken are in fact broken in the machine. We call it systemic, and that systemic change is painful for everybody involved, for the people who want the change, of course for the people who don't want the change, and that just like weight gain, right? When you realize that you're losing, that things tend to reset. You do all of this dieting, you do all this disciplined, all of this disciplined approach to eating and exercise and all of that, and then you take a break and you're right back because your body resets to the status quo. That if you do things within the system, it tends to reset to the status quo, and that is, I think, and that realization is the thing that impels a certain kind of radicalism to say, well, how do you break it? How do you break out of the system? And that I think that's the difference for me.
Annie?
Oh my God, I'm so glad that you went before. Or maybe I'm not so glad you went before me. I don't know, I'm thinking about it more in terms of the play and sort of what is Lorraine asking of the characters in the play, and what of the characters are asking other characters in the play. And the play, I'm just gonna assume everyone's seen it. I know that that's not true, but I feel in order to have a robust conversation, I'm just going to sort of talk about it as though you all have. There's something really interesting about the ending of the play when Iris says, after Sidney recommits to the struggle as a whole person, she says, I think I've been waiting for something, and I think it's for us to be all of ourselves, to be utterly ourselves. And I think that there's the end of the play shows Sidney confessing something about himself, confessing that he is someone who has beliefs, who is an idealist, who is going to pursue those ideals. And I think what's so extraordinary about this play and about what Lorraine is saying about the white liberal too is to listen and to truly open our ears and look around us and recognize the struggle that is happening, maybe not with us ourselves, but with other folks, and in doing so, make a community. So I think I think there's something, for me in the play, there's radical seems to be reintroducing yourself to yourself and being honest and open with others in your life. Because Sidney does commit to an election, but he thinks he can do the election, he thinks he can compartmentalize himself. He thinks he can still get a full night's sleep, eat the way that he eats, treat his friends and his community the same way, and just parse out a little part of him to help this local election happen. And he learns that that's not possible.
Joy?
I think of liberalism and radicalism largely through how Lorraine has taught me to understand it, and being so closely connected with her in my life. There's so many examples that I don't even question, that just kind of flow through my consciousness when I think of those two terms. First of all, I'm going to talk about them as democratic systems. Liberalism to me is a system of privilege, of having arrived, of functioning democratic practice. It's a system where those of us as liberals are privileged to be inside of a system that we think is working, that we think has possibility, that we think has accessibility. And so we as liberals do all we can to help that system to run. We believe in it. That's an important part. We believe in it. And we also are hopeful that that system can deliver. It's a system that affords the privilege of a good life, of having reached a certain kind of power and authority. And it affords a comfort. Radicalism lies outside that system. It's not based in a rival or a feeling of believing in that system. It's a questioning of that system. It's a challenge to that system, and it's a belief that by necessity we have to go out of that system at times. We have to transgress in order to achieve justice. And to go back to liberalism, liberalism is something that really tends to speak to the individual. It tends to speak to an individual sense of belonging and of belief. Radicalism is pushed to manage the inclusion of everyone, of others. The belief is if one is challenged, if one is excluded, chances are everyone can be or is. So there is more of a connection and consciousness towards community and collectivity, and challenge, really.
Yeah, I love that you ended by focusing on how liberalism is about an individual's expansion of their own freedom. And I want to dig a little bit deeper, but I don't want our audience to be dismayed, because although Hansberry gave the speech, The Revolution and the White Backlash, asking her white liberal friends to become radicals, she also gave another speech where she invited all of her white friends to align themselves with the traditions of John Brown. And so she was aware that there's also a deep history in America of white radicals, and that there's a tradition that her white friends could also align themselves with. But I want to dig a little bit deeper about the ways that Hansberry specifically animates radicalism, and I see her as in the tradition of W.E.B. Du Bois, who was one of her teachers, and in their formulation of radicalism, it was always at the intersection of race and class, and so thinking about mass movements of people. Could you talk some, maybe Arminda, if you want to start again, or Annie, about how the sign in Sidney Brustein's window takes up that intersection and helps us to think across race and class, and the ways Hansberry's asking us to think about those categories and pushing us through the play.
I'm trying to answer your question, and the thing that I have in my head is maybe adjacent. But I think that one of the things that Sign does is it has, there is a character in the play who is written as an African American character. That we have another one who it may or may not be, but in the play it's important for one, and that person is also not always apparently black, which is not the same as passing, but is white presenting, right? So he has to tell you, and he will, but he has to for you to know it. And I think it's done that way because it allows a certain forgetfulness sometimes in the community around him. And so he's constantly kind of being, the blackness of him is constantly being kind of minimized and trivialized. And there's a line that Sidney says, well, be a Martian if you want to, as if, that is a viable alternative to, and he points that out. So I think that that what she does is she creates a discomfort and a dis-ease around it without it being, what's the word that I'm looking for? Without it being so obvious. I mean, and maybe a discomfort and dis-ease in the audience too, who sometimes looks and goes, well, what, huh? Because maybe they don't know, but probably they read the bio and understand that. But so I think she's asking, and in Sign, there's the character is very attracted to the movements of the day that are going on, the liberation of African countries, and them joining the UN, and what's going on in Chicago, and what's going on in Harlem, and the Black Civil Rights Movement, and these things are kind of not being talked about in his group, but they know that they're important to him, and yet they only come up as a way to kind of poke fun. So it's a very interesting thing, and I think this character is someone who has been a communist, so he's also very into class. So he's moving in certain circles that are very much about the intersection of race and class, but he is but he's uncomfortable because the community he's in only really is comfortable with him as a former communist, but not him as a black man living in America at a time where racial tensions are on the verge of exploding. Annie, you want to take that from there?
No, I thought that was really beautiful. I mean, I think also what's interesting about it is, how is he dealing with his race and class himself? And we don't really. That actually, there's an explosion that happens towards the end of the play when he finds out that Sidney's sister-in-law, with whom he's engaged to be married, is a prostitute, and no one told him that. and Sidney, his white liberal Jewish friend, didn't have the decency to tell him. And so I think that confrontation excites a narrative of Alton's truth, who he really is, that probably Sidney has never heard before. And that really, really, that reveals his family and where he's from, and what his family is compared to himself living in New York City, in Greenwich Village, at this time, as a communist intellectual. So I think she picks at it, both in terms of how people react to Alton in the space, and then how Alton himself views his past.
Joy, do you want to add something?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. So, and part of this is my own articulation that I've been having about why this play actually is a perfect complement to Raised in the Sun, against some people's belief that it's a departure, because in many ways I see it as an articulation, a further articulation of Hansberry's intellectual vision and her politics and obviously her aesthetics. And that, in my opinion, is partially driven through Black radicalism. And so just wanting to think some with our audience about how this play might be in furtherance of Hansberry's vision versus a departure from those who might know Raised in the Sun better.
What Hansberry has formulated in this play is quite interesting to unpack in terms of what we're all talking about. Because in this play, there's one Black character, and in a very powerful existential way, Hansberry plays with the fact that he is not seen as Black. Now that's deep. That's something to kind of put in your mouth and savor. Because there's a lot of speeches, there's a lot of exchange over his appearance and over his racial identity, his political identity as a Black man. And there's a lot of play with this thing of, is he Black or is he not? To which he speaks directly in all instances, I don't have a choice. And at the same time, he's very powerful and bold and courageous in saying, I am a Black man. That is the identity I choose. And so, nevertheless, across this group of friends, this ensemble who are in the cast, each character has something to say about this thing of, his appearance, color. And there's a lot of talking about it. There's a lot of teasing. There's a lot of rough things said. There's a lot of tempers flared. But it's really something that she chooses to take us through. Not so much what he's saying about himself, which is important. It's important to listen to, and they're pivotal statements. But in terms of how liberalism plays with all of that, is privileged to play with all of that. Like, I think this about you, or I think, it's a very dangerous place. And so Hansberry takes us through those relationships. She takes us through that danger. She takes us through that fragility. She takes us through those swift and careless and hurtful acts of privilege to talk about somebody else. At the same time, she's breaking it down to talk about gender and being a woman. She's breaking it down to talk about being queer and being, an artist, a queer artist. She breaks it down to talk about sex labor. So she's thinking about it on a lot of levels, but I think the point is to take us into the discomfort.
Yeah. Annie, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add, because what you're saying, Joy, also is making me think, and the way that you framed the question, so you go like, how does she push us through? You know, I was thinking about our conversation about who Alton is politically at the beginning of the play and who he chooses to surround himself with versus where he's going, and the way that Sidney names A Star is Rising over Harlem at the very end is to sort of take us through, and it happens off stage. We don't see it, but we sense it. Just Alton's own radicalization. And in terms of the privilege, I think, there's something in the play where the three sisters, they all have a different story about their father. And it varies, I think, in class too. And that's something that is able to be messed with these three white sisters, but there's nothing to be messed with in terms of Alton's truth of his past. And the last thing I'll say, Kachi and I were talking last night. Kachi is my assistant director, brilliant young woman, young director. And I was saying, in each scene that Alton's in, he comes into the space, then he exits it within the scene, and he comes back. And what's interesting about that, to me, structurally, is that it asks the question, what is going on off stage with him? No other character does that. I mean, who doesn't live in the Brustein household, And there's always something that's happened in the space that changes the environment that he walks into. So if and when we get to do this again, I'm going to capitalize on that.
Oh, yes. I was going to say, for those of you who haven't seen it, this is a good time for you to advocate for a chance to see it in the future. But we're going to give you some more tidbits to get you even more excited for those who haven't seen it, for those who are going to see it. And so both Joy and Annie, you mentioned the sisters. And so can we talk some about if being a woman radical requires different things in the 1960s and today, and what Hansberry's doing with this set of women, all whom are sisters, but all who are very different in the play.
Yeah, what is she doing? Well, I will say one thing. It's kind of amazing throughout the play. I mean, when we were in rehearsal for it, Sidney sits around the apartment most of the time pontificating. I think he's working on his newspaper sometimes, and he'll move a box of things from one side of the room to the other very occasionally. I think once, actually. And actually, Rachel said as Iris, she's like losing weight because she literally is she's doing everything on stage. We keep having, she has to make the food, she has to set the table, she's the one who's earning the money, actually. So she is everything. She is constantly moving and picking up things and changing and cooking and bringing home the bacon and cooking for all the men in the all the men who come in and visit, opening beers for them, racing around. Right when she's in the middle of something else, they ask her to do something. Yes, and then Mavis is of the sort of has married into the leisure class, I would say, and then there's Gloria, who is who's a prostitute, and in a way, what's interesting about it is that you get the sense that they are so focused on survival, and all of them have a story of survival, of how they're going to move through the world and how they're going to live to the next day in a way that we don't hear from with the men.
Arminda, do you?
One of the things that's interesting about the sisters is we've talked about they have this father. They all feel very different, but they have a father who they each have a very different vision of or interpretation of, and I think, yeah, I'm going to give away things. Sorry, but in one of the final scenes, the older sister talks about the father and how he changed their names to Parados because they were the chorus that they sat and they didn't take part in the action. They were commenters. They were, they didn't change anything, but they noticed everything and they witnessed everything and they commented on things like a Greek chorus. And in one way, that's fun meta theater, but it's also a kind of description of the way women typically are expected to move or were expected to move in the world in those days. And each one has a different response to it. The older sister has kind of made a space and made a way for that. She does sit and comment and watch, and she listens, and she's a very present witness, and she has talents that she doesn't use. And things that she kind of swallows down and only once gives herself permission to tell anybody what her life is. But she's embraced that role. She's proud of that role, that, being the Paradis. And then you have Sidney's wife, Iris, who kind of thought that was a role, but it is not. She chafes under it. It's not a role for her. And so her struggle is to grow out what her dream is to be a performer, an actor, somebody who's famous, somebody who doesn't sit in the corner, somebody who's known. It's like the exact opposite of that is what she's going for. And though she doesn't tell that story about her father, her response to her father, claiming that her father was unread and an idiot, and these things are not true, but they also are true in that he prescribed a role that she is adamantly against, right? And then you have the youngest, who just seems to have been beaten down by that role, and she's been dragged kind of into this world as a chance that was presented to her as a chance to shine, but is really just something that makes her more invisible. And so I think that, and the question though is whether or not radicalism, I think, it's questioned because they're all very individual struggles, right?
Right. But I think both of your answers also focused on the types of labor that are available to women in this period. I know, Joy, you have something brilliant to add, so I don't want to say too much.
I was going to talk about that. I think that I just want to talk a little bit about Lorraine's writing this play, because it's an extraordinary piece in development. It originally started where the central figure was named Jenny Reed, and the play was The Sign in Jenny Reed's Window. And Lorraine at that time was very involved in the book The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. She was incredibly drawn to this this feministic exploration and statement had a profound impact on her. And she realized her project in writing this play was developing towards a need to look at patriarchy and take it down. And so she came through her creative process of writing to understand that she needed a central figure who was male that could be surrounded by this chorus of women who could offer the critical lens to understand the patriarchal power he had. And so these three sisters are extraordinary because they represent the labor of women as caretakers, the labor of women as wives and girlfriends and partners. And they became very powerful as a unified critique, as well as powerful in their individual lives, their lived lives. And these three sisters are completely different. They have different dreams, they have different personalities, but they all have a way of speaking to the central character, to Sidney, that really challenges him and his assumptions and his power and his authority. And I think that Hansberry creates an incredible lens to help us understand the nature of his crisis and what he was undergoing, what he was trying to protect, and at the same time gives us a way in through these three different characters who are compelling. They're characters who, when you see them in the play, you relate to their stories, you relate to their lives, you relate to their dreams. And so that's our way in, really, to understand sort of the nature of the kind of paralysis that this primary character is in.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, Hansberry is thinking about the intersection, thinking about how gender informs what type of work people can do, how that informs the family. When she's writing her letters to the lesbian periodical The Ladder in 1957, so these ideas are percolating in her mind before Raisin all the way through till she writes these two brilliant plays. And I think it's always important to note how different the world was for women and for all of us in the 1950s and 60s versus where we are today. And in saying that, although the play gives us a vision for the political present, I would proffer that it might also give us a vision for our political future. What do you all think about what the play might offer us about our politics in 2023?
I mean, I think that Simon is coming for me at a time that it feels resonant in all the worst ways. It feels like we are still having a conversation about, for instance, you know, a few years ago, we were all very allied on what the future of the country needed to be and whether or not police reform was a thing, and which is a thing in this play, a conversation about police reform that at the end of the play becomes, police reform. You know, it's and that we go through this cycle of yes, this is all very important, and then, you know, other things get important. The paycheck gets important. You know, unions or something, whatever. Something gets important that is not justice. And meanwhile, you have forces that are actively pushing back against people who are kind of willing to be pushed. And so I think that that is a thing that resonates with me. The other is this kind of there's a campaign that goes on that Sidney throws himself into as with reason, not illogically, that, you know, in his mind, that, you know, if you get this campaign, you can do a small good thing, and this person will do a small good thing. And it turns out that actually this person is pretty easily co-opted by everything that went on before, and how dispiriting it can be to put your all into a political movement that turns out is actually just very well disguised, same old, whether it's set out to be that thing in the beginning or not. How easy it is to co-opt a political movement into what they call the machine, right? And so how do you function when you have ostensibly won, if not the great victory you were hoping for, when you have won a battle, when things are not as bad as they might have been had 2020 gone another way, and yet you still look around and you're still faced with, but we have a lot of injustice that isn't going away, and we have a battle for still going on in full effect about what kind of place and community we're going to be and who's going to matter in it. And what you need is people to be engaged in that question, and what you have are people who are easily distracted. And I think that it's really compelling that in her diaries, in the same year that Hansberry is talking about the need to be, the need to be American radicals, she is also questioning her ability to do that. She's also questioning whether she's willing to give up her own comfort, whether she, so it's not preaching at, it's kind of calling into accountability everybody who feels strongly or moderately that things need to change, not to be distracted, and kind of looking at the ways that not only the ways that we are, personally distracted, but identity politics, I think we're calling it. There's a lot of that in this play, where people who are friends and part of a community, part of at least Sidney's apartment, they are all kind of at odds with one another in ways that serve to tear things apart, in ways that serve status quo, right? If you're liberal, communist, civil rights movement person is also a homophobe, that's detrimental to the alliance. If that person is also willing to take advantage of the sex worker on a normal night, that is also that tears away at alliances. If you are, there was a comment, I can't remember who made it, but it was talked about how it's hard to reconcile Sidney's kind of laissez-faire liberalism with his sexism, as if those things don't often go hand in hand, right? But those are things that tear at the ability to join together. And so I think that it really, that the play really, while we were working on it and even now, it helps me to, just be aware, not just of the things that other people do and say that kind of tear at the ability to join and ally against and to build the world that we want, but also the ways in which, I do that, because we are not, we are a bundle of contradictions and imperfections, and so it's important to notice where your boundaries are and how those boundaries, how they work against the thing that you want. That was long, sorry.
It's okay. It was good. Annie?
Yeah, I'm not going to, yeah, it's really, it's excellent because because I think what you're getting at, Arminda, which I think is what Lorraine is doing, you know, we can say that, oh, the issues in the play reflect the issues that we're still working on or battling with, but that's almost superficial in a way, because she's prescient, but we think she's prescient because she understands human nature. And what she's doing actually is revealing dynamics between groups of people who have been made groups of people by, you know, through history. And the other thing that I just want to say is that what we get a lot of in this play is assumptions. So what you're talking about, you know, these, I call it a motley crew inside of Sidney Brustein's home. But I don't think that the folks inside the home think of themselves as motley, or that, you know, or that person's really different from me. That person is like me. And that's where we get into trouble, I think. And I think that this play, like you said, Arminda, reminds us that it's not a bad thing to be different, but to recognize it and make alliances fully aware of that.
Can I see a show of hands of people who have seen the play? Oh, that's great. That's great. Good. This play is it's a play of ideas. What Lorraine does in this play is she shares a world which each person in the play exists in, you know, a social world. Things are going on in 1964 in Greenwich Village and in the world. And she talks about things that are going on in the world, things that are going on in their heads, things they think about, hot topics. And from the beginning, we know that the central character is tired of it all. He just wants to retreat. He doesn't want to be bothered. He's been involved in movements. He's had it. And he's trying to figure out the basic things. You know, he's trying to make a living. He's trying to make a go of it. He's trying to be a better person. But he really doesn't know the next step. Many of the other characters are in similar proximity to that kind of crisis. They're all at a point where they have to decide, are they going to take action or not in their immediate situation? And what Hansberry does is she not only gives us these wonderful characters with wonderful stories and helps us enter into their crisis and their predicament, but she helps us through that to enter into ours and to relate to that state of being. So that from the very beginning of the play, it's about what are you going to do? What are you going to do with it? And there's a lot of banter about what it is and the opinions and emotions, the feelings, but it's really about, are you going to be comfortable in that crisis? Are you going to kind of curl up and feel sorry for yourself, or are you going to do something about it? And what are you going to do? So the whole play from the very beginning is trying to move forward and to assist in that. And there's a lot of talk about what it is to just feel that distress, that uncertainty, that feeling of frustration, and she gives us a lot of different contexts for understanding that kind of frustration. It's happening in a marriage right before us in the play. It's happening within a cohort, a group of people who really love each other but have issues with one another. It's happening individually. People are in a place of stuckness in their lives where they have to They have to do something different. They're broken. And so the play's really about movement. It's about getting us all to imagine our movement from liberalism to radicalism. It's helping us to get that ignition. One of the things that most excites me about this play is that millennials come to see this play and they love it. They get it, they plug into it because they're looking for solutions. They're looking for an identity that can, make a difference, that can create change. They understand the state of their world and they're trying to find a way to move forward and to be a part of something. They are not afraid of movements. They want to be part of a movement. And so this play is something that's it's like manna for them. It's like food. It's like, it's inspiring. And so there's an energy that happens that has excited me. There are people who are excited and talking about it and talking to their friends about it and sending their friends. It's a whole movement that has occurred. The thing that's so profound about this play compared to Lorraine's other plays, and I know them all, is that this play is meant to set the audience in motion. It's a challenge play. It challenges us to, as I've already said, become radicalized by the possibilities before us.
And the radicalism emerges through making a choice. And so resisting the comfort, resisting the stasis, or resisting not doing something different. In order to change, you have to change. There has to be something you do differently. And so part of the play, part of what's lovely about her work to me is that she draws attention to how the everyday choices everyday people make matter to movements. And it's not that moment where Martin Luther King is standing on the podium at the March on Washington, which of course is important, but it's all those individual choices that movement workers made to lay the foundation for us to get to that point. And focusing on everyday people was how Hansberry saw radicalism, the radical transformation of society taking place. So I love that you focus, and all of you focused on the ways that the characters are at crossroads, and that being the impetus for how she's thinking about politics and how she's thinking about movement. So I have one more question, but I want to put you all on alert that we have microphones, or at least we have one microphone, and we're going to have time for you to ask questions. So you can start thinking about your questions. If you're an eager beaver, you might want to start making your way to the microphone as I'm asking my last question. Oh, they're on both sides. Oh, yes, there's another one over here. So I'm going to ask one more, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. So this play has just been such a joy to see, and many of the articles written about it have noted that it's less produced than Raised in the Sun, obviously. And so this production is very important because in many ways it adds to the unfinished work of Hansberry and her legacy. And so I'm curious for all of you who've helped to produce the artistic vision for the play. Joy, you've been shepherding this work for many years and getting it to this point. How you think the production fits into Hansberry's legacy and some of her unfinished business.
Joy, that's a question for you, because you're the keeper of the legacy.
This play is very near and dear to my heart. It's my favorite of Lorraine's plays. I think it's her most courageous play. And it's a play that she wrote and gave to the stage while she knew she was dying. So she held nothing back. And it's an extraordinary, ambitious intense, full play that seeks to be something that theater, commercial theater, does not intend to do, which is to trouble us, to kind of stir something up, to get us to ask questions, our own questions, to lead us to a place where we feel incomplete, we feel some kind of unresolved, lack of certainty, and it's meant to kind of kick us into communities so that we have to talk to other people to get a collective understanding of possibilities, solutions. It's a different kind of theater. And in 1964, critics weren't ready for it. They were like, what is this? My hope as literary trustee was that 60 years later, and it's been 60 years, that critics would have caught up, would have on some level been more prepared to receive what this play gives and challenges. And I'm disappointed that critics still, by and large, those keepers of the guardians of the status quo, aren't ready for it, are still not ready for a kind of theater that looks at ideas, that challenges, that ask us to self-examine, and that ask us to talk to one another, to listen to one another, to have the difficult conversations. And so, as I was saying before, I'm happy that there's a generation that is coming around, who's moving around to say yes to that, to get on board. And I'm hoping that there's going to be a new reading and understanding of this last and important play of Lorraine's.
One of the things that we've talked about is how much the play is calling our attention to the difficulties of diplomacy. So this is 1964. We're at the closing on the end of the classical phase of the civil rights movement, which most historians mark with the passing of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. We then tip into Black Power, which is much more about, not that the civil rights movement is not about direct action, but that Black Power in its very name is trying to move in a more aggressive manner towards self-realization for Black folks. And at this time, Hansberry is asking us, what are we going to do? And so I asked Beneatha in 1959 in Raisin, what are you going to do? Hansberry asked us the same thing similarly, what are the characters going to do? And I love that response that you gave, Joy, about thinking about how theater can be a space to interrogate the individual. Arminda, Annie, I don't know if there's something you want to add.
I think I love that you brought in Assegai and Beneatha, because I kind of feel like one of the things that this that sign does is it kind of brings into relief the way that Raisin is also a play about ideas. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? It's a play about money and what you do with it. It's a play about class. It's a play about Black respectability versus, and how you go about attaining things, right? So and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, and it's definitely about women, right? So, and it's interesting that in a play that is so much guided and driven and run around women, it still manages to somehow in the minds of people be about this man. Right, so maybe just making it the sign in Sidney Brustein's window allowed her to go, fine, you're going to make it about this man, and here are these women, because that's. So I just think that it kind of completes a way of looking at her work as being about ideas, but the stories of the characters are, the ideas live in the character stories. So it's not heady. You know, it's not heady because these are things that are that these people, that these characters, these people feel in their guts. You know, they're leading with that. They're not, even Sidney, who talks a lot and pontificates a lot, is wrestling with this desire and this discontent and this fear, right? This fear that things are changing in a way that he can't control, and he doesn't quite know how to make things work for him, right? And so I think that for me has been part of the process, part of the thing that Sign has, that Sign like wraps up. It helps me to, you know, to kind of understand Hansberry in this way, but also because it's so much about the world that she knows, the people who go see theater, right? Because people who go see theater are very much a class. And were then in New York anyway. I mean, less so because it was a little bit cheaper, but still, you know, who talks about theater? Well, people who read the New York Times and the Daily News and the New Yorker, and those people, and they read and they go, wow, this is what this is about. And so it's also these people in the village, these artists who are making it, and the intellectuals, and so it's taking this community and really asking it to look at itself through the eyes of someone who is and is not them, right? And I had this thought when we were talking about Alton and what that was, and how much an intellectual, the Black intellectual in that time, was very much like an Alton. You're given a pass. You know, you are and are not. You are and are not Black. You know, you're an intellectual. You're articulate. You've read Molière or whatever. You know.
I thought you were going somewhere else with that.
You tell me where you thought I was going. But I mean, but then, and so, you know, just really kind of reasserting, you know, her ability to move through all of these worlds because she belongs to all of these worlds, and in the way that Ira says, it is a play, and it is a work in which she is actually exploring and being all of herself, right?
Annie, I know that you may not want to touch the big picture legacy, but I think our audience should also know that you directed Sign at the Goodman, which was a very different moment in theater history and our world's history. So could you just talk some about your relationship to the ongoing legacy of this play?
Absolutely, and I just want to address briefly your question, you know, why do we think that this isn't produced a lot? I think this idea of an unfinished play, I really have a huge issue with it, because who's to say that it's not finished? I think that it doesn't follow the same rules that, I mean, the issue is, or not the issue, the reality is, A Raisin in the Sun is a perfect play in the tradition of perfect plays of this culture, you know? It couldn't be better constructed in our sort of tradition of playmaking. There's a family, it's an insular family, it happens on one set, the intruders are from the outside, they come in and they intrude and they mess with what's happening inside the room. The play that Sign and Sidney Brustein's Window, and there's a plot. We're following something. We're following the money, and we're following how people are going to deal with the money, or the loss of the money, or the dreams that the money can afford. This play, and I would imagine many of you are like, what is this play about? What am I watching? What's happening? Am I supposed to be watching Sidney? Am I supposed to be watching Iris? Is it their relationship? Is it Alton's fight? You know, for me, unfinished feels like freedom, and it's your favorite play, Joy. I feel like there is a freedom and a joy and a kind of expressiveness that this play shows us about her that is not still not accepted, I guess. I mean, it's very postmodern. We're past that now. What she was, she preceded that. It's courageous, it's ambitious, and it's going after something really big. And I guess people, I don't know, I guess that's not, it doesn't have a tidy ending, or I don't know. I don't know what people want from
Well,
theater.
I'm hearing you talking about the finished or unfinishedness of the play has made me think a lot about commodity culture, because part of being finished is also having to do with being able to sell the play and all of the rest. The final version, right, is the one that's published and all the rest. And in hearing you talk about it, it made me think some about how this play, as Joyce just said, is calling us into it, right? And so that in some ways, the productions are responding to Hansberry's calling us into doing the work that she needs us all to do. And so that in that way, this production and this play and the work that you all have done in thinking about this version of the play is such a wonderful manifestation of her politics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think so. And she wasn't finished. We're not finished. None of us will be finished. The next generation's not going to be finished. I mean, it's an open-ended thing. You can't just put it in your pocket and leave and feel something simple and and you get it. I got it, and I got my money's worth. So, yeah. So that's I just take issue with it. Or you know what? The fact that unfinished is a bad thing. That's what I might take issue with.
So we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. So if you would just join us, there's microphones on both sides. I think you've gotten here first, so please.
Hi. First of all, I was thinking 3 hours, God. It went by in 2 seconds. It's amazing, amazing. Loved it. My question is, talking about like change and people changing. I thought it was interesting that at the end, Gloria made a change where she was invited to do the usual thing that was so painful, invited upstairs and do this sordid thing. And then she was like, no, no, no. And she ran back downstairs. Sorry if there's any spoilers. And then she kills herself. And I thought, well, I'm asking, do you think that she couldn't? And that was a change for the positive. She was like, I'm not going to do this thing that pains me. That could have been the beginning of a whole, she could have then maybe gotten back with Alton, maybe, except who knows. But why do you think she chose to kill herself when she made a positive change? That's just my question.
Thank you for that question. I think that's a really beautiful reading of that last moment.
That is gorgeous. Do you want to take it?
I mean, I think it's in conversation with Camus.
Yeah, I think it is, and it's. I think there's something about the solitude of the moment that it's. She's making a change, and she needs a community around her, right? She needs a community around her. She needs Sidney to wake up. She needs somebody to be there to help her through, like the terror and the uncertainty and the self-doubt, right? And she's alone. And I mean, I think that there is, that when we talk about, yes, Camus and the and when it's all about the individual and it's all about the individual to carry, that it can't support itself.
I'm not sure this is on. Yeah, it's on now. Oops, sorry. Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm a huge fan of Lorraine. In fact, my first favorite play was her Raisin in the Sun I wrote about in high school. One question that sort of goes back to the discussion a few moments ago is how her plays get sort of bucketed. And I know when A Raisin in the Sun came out, even though I've always felt it was a play of ideas. It was very much made to be this very 50s sort of almost kitchen sink drama, and the focus on the mother and the son, and perhaps less on some of the many significant social issues of segregation and racism. And that was an easy way of sort of selling it. It wasn't sold that way, but it was the way it was perhaps the media portrayed it, the critics portrayed it. And I think in addition, as just been pointed out, Brustein, which I read in college because there was no way to see it, I always felt was a very interesting play, but this whole label of unfinished has always troubled me. And one thing I wanted to pose to all of you, I think you've kind of alluded to it a bit, is just as Raisin was sort of characterized in a certain way that sort of met very sort of almost reactionary mainstream perceptions and expectations, labeling this an unfinished work that doesn't work dramatically, that's just a good collection of characters, may not reflect the change that happened very quickly between when Raisin was produced. At 1960 was almost like still the 50s, whereas this is the early 60s now, whereas, Anne, you mentioned postmodernism, experimental theater. Is it not the growth of Lorraine as an artist? And she's speaking about her milieu, the people she's with, and in some respects, the expectation and the frame on how this play is judged almost doesn't seem to fit her ambitions and the time she was doing it just a few years after Raisin. And it's almost an easy way of dismissing it because of the very hard questions. It points right at those critics in mainstream society who would much more easily like to dismiss this critique versus look at this nice black family drama.
Ooh, rich question. Come on with the rich question.
Can you repeat your question? I'm completely.
I just think that was a great comment.
I am so with you.
Okay,
I
guess my question, I probably took a long time to get there, is this
take your time.
framing, is this framing more of society's reaction to it,
Yeah.
both critically then and, as you said, Joy, today, in not wanting to face the hard truths that Lorraine poses? It's so much easy to say it's unfinished and the work doesn't work dramatically, and it's just good characters, versus face the questions she raises. And I think, to me, that's a little bit of what's going on. I'd love to get your perspectives.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of what's going on. As I said, I'm with you. I think that a couple of things I want to say, and then I'm going to let other people speak to it. We have to be really careful about who issues terms that we circulate. Mm-hmm. I'm very bothered by this unfinished play thing. It's sort of like, as her executor, I want to like say, who said that? You know, and because of the way I was raised politically, it's like, I want to find that person and I want to have a conversation with that person. It's like, it's curiosity and it's a need to have a conversation about it, have an understanding of what we're saying to one another. I think that all the things that Lorraine asks of us in this work are gifts that challenge us to just be mindful participants in the social world we live in. You know, Lorraine was a person who loved conversation. She loved sharing and she loved listening. And I think she wants us to do that. She wants us to think. And so this play is meant to be that kind of theater. And I'm hoping, you know, that people are impacted by it. I'll leave it at that.
I just want to thank you for you articulated it so beautifully, and I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you for bringing it to the stage.
I think we have time for one more.
I have to say one thing. Sister, you are sharp. I mean, from the bracelet to the glasses to the boots to the dress, like...
Everything.
Get it, executor. I just had to say that. Can I get a witness? Anyway. Question, comment. just like the lady said, I watched this play. It was 3 hours. I love the theater. I always fall asleep. I'm like, oh, I saw 60% of that play. That's my barometer. I saw this whole thing. I could not. My mind was so alive. It was riveting. And I want to say about Lorraine that, like, this is obviously BAM and BRIC, and this is a talk back, and it's intellectual, so we're talking about the ideas and blah, 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 and all of that. We're smart people. But I love Lorraine Hansberry because she gets you inside of that world of ideas and people who are making ideas and pushing the ideas of the time, but she just gives you people that you know and that you fall in love with that are perfectly imperfect. She gives you these perfectly imperfect men, like Sidney and Walter. They're the parallels to me, because they're trying to push. They're generous, but they're selfish. They're trying to do the right thing, and they get it right, and they get it wrong, and they're sexist, and they're selfish, but they're good-hearted inside. There's a love that she has for men, and an understanding of men that, as a man, when I saw the two protagonists, I said, I know what it's like to try to be the good guy, and you got these strong women around you, and they're always telling you what you didn't get wrong, but you're there for them. Like, Sidney was there for all of those women. All of those sisters came to his house to bare their souls, to live, to be reborn, to die, to be honest, to fight for love. Like, there's something about men that she really loved and got. But there's also, it's a play, there's 3 women, there's 3 archetypal women, 3 different kinds of women, just like in Raisins in the Sun, there's these 3 different kinds of women, like, more conservative, more radical, and to me, it's like Lorraine is like this free spirit, like this free black woman who is a free spirit, almost like Benitha was like, I want to dream bigger than what people see is available to me. And the painter in this play, he's just painting. He's this completely free spirit, like, I am a painter. I'm not political. I'm just in my other world painting. So there's a freedom that she represents that you see and you feel about her that is so courageous. And I think in a lot of ways this play was about the activism, fatigue of activism, and these perfectly imperfect people trying to fight these systems, and they're tired and taking it out on the ones we love, which is that happens to the best of us. But I wanted y'all to talk about Lorraine Hansberry as the quintessential free spirit that she really is, and in her legacy continues to beam a light over blackness as freedom.
Well, that was brilliant.
So I think that's actually yours.
Yes, thanks to the generous support of Joy, I wrote a book called Radical Vision, and one of the central thrusts of the book is that Hansberry develops practices of freedom that ask of us every day to make choices and to do it again and to try again, and that her politics, her intellect, her activism were all intertwined into these day-to-day ways that she's advancing freedom. And that freedom is not a destination, but it's a practice that we get wrong and we do again and we try again and we try again. And so the embodiment of it all, the ongoingness of it all, I think is very central. And I know you didn't ask this, but I just want to mention that Hansberry grew up in a household with 2 very powerful parents, and the loss of her father at a young age was a huge impact on her. And so I think it's helpful.
And 2 very wealthy parents, correct?
They were definitely wealthy,
which allowed her kind
speaking.
of some privilege, right?
Yeah, and some freedom.
Yeah.
But I think the loss of her father and her relationship with Robert Nimrov, you can see those relationships impacting how she sees men and women in the worlds of her play. And so just to name those impacts, I think is important, and which is, where you began thinking about the beautiful way she gives us round characters that are men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Did you guys want to say anything about that freedom practice?
I think that thing you said was just so, there's something about the mystery. I mean, there's something about Lorraine Hansberry, Baldwin's essay was called Sweet Lorraine, and there's something that makes you want to call her Lorraine, right? There's something that makes you not want to call her Hansberry. You would say Hansberry says, but it feels like Lorraine. And there's something about watching her that draws you in, and I think it is her. There's a fearlessness in her articulation of herself and the world as she sees it, in the generosity she extends to the people around her, to engage them, to challenge them. Sometimes they don't appreciate that, but she's engaging. She's always engaging. There's a story about her being part of a group who goes to visit Robert Kennedy in 1963. And she's like, well, what about Birmingham? You're not doing enough in Birmingham. And this is before the bombing. It was during summer when there were a lot of little bombings before the big one that killed the children in the church. But you know, she's saying, you got to do something. You got to do something. He felt very insulted because he was really coming to be congratulated. You know, he was coming to have his brother be congratulated for, you know, all of their good, you know, intentions. And but there's something about her that is, I think, you know, generations later, so personally compelling. And it is that fearlessness, it is that freedom. I mean, and I know that sometimes you read her journals and you go, oh, wait, actually human, actually afraid of things, actually concerned, actually in pain and doubting of self, but pushing through that all the time and kind of inspiring, you know, the question, you know, what can I push through today? What can I push through? How do I develop practices of freedom? What does it mean to develop practices of freedom? I mean, I just babbled, but that's, you know, for me, that's what I think about that and freedom. And
yeah,
thank you
it's
for
so
that question.
lovely. It's so lovely to think about how she pushed people. So there's a moment in Nina Simone's autobiography where she talks about achieving a career goal of singing at Carnegie Hall. And after the performance, she called, Nina Simone and Lorraine Hansberry were dear friends. And after she finished the concert, she called Lorraine and Lorraine said, what are you doing for the movement whilst leaders are in jail? Because at this time, Martin Luther King was in jail because of all the unrest in Birmingham, and that's when he wrote Letter from Birmingham Jail. And so she said, I'm glad for you, sis, that you got to sing at Carnegie Hall, but what are you doing for the movement while your leaders are in jail? And you see all these moments where she's pushing folks. You see that in Sweet Lorraine, Baldwin's essay, Sweet Lorraine, too. So she was an organizer, as the Trust's motto states. She was an intellect, an artist, an activist. And all of these things are animated in her work. And so I want to invite you to join me in thanking our brilliant panelists for this lovely conversation. And I hope those who have not had a chance to see the play get a chance to see it. Thank you so much.
And especially the exhibit.
Yeah. I mean, the exhibit is
Again, nothing is known for me. I know nothing is ever going to bring Akil back. The reason I continue doing what I do is because